Thank you all. Lee kind of left this open-ended for me as far as what to talk about today. The instructions were something like your time serving Fresno County and your accomplishments. So I can talk just about anything. I do have some prepared statements because there was a great board meeting at the supervisors meeting on Tuesday. And I will talk a little bit about what I said there because I wrote it and I don't want to waste it. I'm going to do it again. So, 42 years is a long time in a profession. It's a long time, especially when you're in a service profession like law enforcement. I tried to figure out the other day how many years I have been 24/7 on call for something, and it's decades. And so for the next 16 days, I will be 24/7, and then overnight, I have to turn it off. And I have to get my mind right about that. And it's not going to be easy to go just from one good night to one wake up and be off. I expect a transition. A lot of questions that I get are, what are you going to do next? I have no big plans except just to decompress. After that long in public service and 16 years as sheriff, I just need some time to decompress. But I have reflected over my years of service, and I want to thank the city of Sanger and Sanger Rotary. You've been so gracious over the years. I've been here several times to speak, and every time you make me feel so welcome, and it's a pleasure to come out. So good for you, Sanger. I am able to relax a little bit because I know I'm turning over the sheriff's office. It's going to be in good hands with Sheriff-elect Zannoni. He rose to the top when it came to trying to decide in succession planning who was going to be next. He's walking around a little wide-eyed right now, I'll tell you, because he's getting a little taste of what it's going to take to be sheriff of a large county in California. And one of the things I recommend, I talked to Chief Gardner about this, is let him know at least once a year, try to make it to all of our city councils, at least once during the year, show up and let the city councils know that not only does the sheriff think you're important, but the cooperation between our chiefs of police and our sheriff's office is very important. You need to know and be comforted by the fact that we work together. We don't work separate in our silos. It's important for us to work together. One of the things that was important to me when I first took office was to really bring our local agencies closer with our state and federal agencies. And we did that. We meet once a month with all of the local state and federal agencies. When I say federal, I mean federal. We have Secret Service, Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They show up at our monthly meetings for the Fresno Madera County's Police Chiefs Association. And so be comforted by that. We are working together to do our best to keep you safe. It's interesting to me to think back in the fall of 1979 when I thought I wanted to be a teacher. Until I worked in a second grade classroom as a teacher's aide, and I knew that was not going to be my career path. But in the fall of 1979, I get a telephone call, and I've told this story before, but the lessons that I've learned and I hope I pass on is to be flexible, because what you think you may want to be may not be what you're meant to be. And so I worked in this elementary school for many, many years. Worked as a teacher's aide. I was a school librarian. I was a cafeteria lady for a while. And I got to the point where I worked in the business office in their accounting department, and I learned a lot. But I get a telephone call one night from my father, who said, "I'm going to a retirement party. Would you like to go with me?" I said, "Sure, Dad." I said, "How come Mom's not going?" "Well, she's got a headache." And "All right, I'll go with you." And I went, and it was the retirement party for the chief of police for the city of Kerman. And while there, I met the incoming chief of police, and he said words to me that changed my life. he said, you know, one of my goals is to hire the first female police officer for the city of Kerman. And I said, if I know of anybody interested, I'll let you know. But on the way home that night, I talked to my dad and I said, you know, I need a career. I was a single mom at the time. I need to be able to support myself and my son. I need a career. I've gone as far as I could in this elementary school without being certificated. So I applied for the job in Kerman and they hired me. Now, remember, in the fall of 1979, for a chief of police to say, I want to hire a female police officer, make it a goal, a point, purposefully to hire a female police officer, that was something at that time. But he hired me, and I went to work for them in January of 1980. They had to change all of our badges because the badges at the time said patrolman. And so everybody changed their badges and it said patrol officer on our badges. I wish I had one of those patrolman badges today. But it really was a sea change in the way law enforcement agencies developed. When I worked in Kerman, because I had friends that worked in the police department at the time. One was a family friend, Eddie Singh, he's gone now, but he would always show up or jump my calls whenever I got dispatched. And I said, Eddie, what are you doing? And he says, God, he said, you know how bad I'd feel if something happened to you? And I said, Eddie, you can't do that. You can't do that to me. I need to be able to prove myself and handle these calls. And do you know how bad I'd feel if something happened to you because of what you're doing? So there was a big transition in the way people felt about women in law enforcement at the time. But I'll just never forget those times. I'll never forget the first murderer I arrested. I'll never forget the first person I sent to prison. I'll never forget the first baby I delivered. I tell the story of one time while working in Kerman, a couple were speeding through town and they stopped at what we call Four Corners. It's 180 and 145 in Kerman, and the lady was in labor. Ambulance gets there. She has the baby in the back of the ambulance at that intersection. I was wondering on your birth certificate, what do you put as the location of birth?
Four Corners.
Four Corners. But there was a Hispanic couple, and I looked at this little baby girl, and I said, "Se llama?" And they said, "No sé." And I said, "Margarita es muy bonita." So there might be a 40-something-year-old Margarita around that I've never crossed paths with. Born in Four Corners. Another baby boy I actually helped deliver in the holding cell of the police department. They decided to go because she was so in advanced labor was to the police department. The only place we had for him to lay down was in the holding cell, and that's where this little baby boy was born. But I'll write a book someday. You know, they didn't make women's uniforms either. We went down the old Walter Smith's on the Fulton Mall. Yeah, that's where we went to buy our uniforms. Everybody went there to buy their uniforms, and of course I walk in. Everything has to be tailored. And, you know, men's shirts and pants, men's shoes. I had to buy men's uniform shoes, and things have really changed. Now you can really, most of the time they can order, but if you don't, most of the time you can walk into a uniform shop and get things made for women nowadays. So many stories. Probably the most fun I had and most fun assignment was as a canine handler, and this was back in the 80s, and it was before the city of Fresno had their own canine unit. But it was a fun time because they always called you for the hot calls. We always got to go to those fun calls, and my dog, his name was Justice, fantastic dog. Great stories. He'll be a chapter in my book someday, but he was a great community dog, and that's really what you want. Not only a dog that knows when it's time to work, but a dog that knows when it's time to be a community dog. And Justice was that kind of deputy dog. He knew the difference. And he, in fact, I got him when I went back to work after our children, my daughter was born. And I still say she learned to walk pulling up on that dog's fur. But when you know, being a woman in law enforcement, things happen differently for you. I mentioned my daughter. So when we were trying to have her, back then, the pregnancy tests weren't pretty instant like they are now. You had to take the test and wait a couple hours. Well, I took the test the morning before I went to work. And a couple hours later, I called my husband. I said, go in the bathroom, look at this little end of the tube. If there's a little dot at the bottom of the tube, a little circle, let me know. And so he went and came back to the phone and he said, and I'm at a phone booth back then, she's 30-something years old now, at a phone booth on the phone with my husband. He comes back and he says, well, how big a circle does it have to be? And during that time before I went on light duty, I'll tell this story, we're all adults in this room, but we might have a quirky sense of humor in law enforcement, but there was a time when I really wanted to testify in court, because while I was expecting her, I did go to a call. It was a vandalism call. Husband and wife having a dispute. She shows up at his place of business and pours paint all over his car. He had a collector car and he was proud of this car. She poured paint over the top of it. So he calls the sheriff's office and we get there and he's mad. He's angry because it took us too long to get there and he's mad at her and he wants to make a vandalism report and violation of a restraining order. He actually had a restraining order against her. And remember, I just got in the news that I was going to have my daughter. And he said, and you could just go get effed, right? So about 8 months later, the case comes up in court. And I thought, I really want to go and testify. 8 months pregnant.
I did.
And have the attorney say, and then what did he tell you, Deputy Mims? He told me to go get. That's the kind of sense of humor we have in law enforcement. As it turns out, he actually dropped the charges against her. They probably got back together. I don't know. Those kinds of memories, for some reason, stick out in my mind. There's so many things I don't remember, and I think about, Doug, in your career, and so many deputies that I've worked in different aspects. I had one of our field training officers, I meet at our gas pumps. It's right where I park in the sheriff's office. I walk by the gas pump. That's where a lot of my best conversations I have with our personnel. When I get parked, there's usually somebody parked there filling up with gas, or in our evidence room, which is in the hallway as I'm going to the elevators. I'll stop and always ask the deputies if they're in there, what'd you get? What are you booking? And it's just a good time for me to connect with personnel and have conversations. But at the gas pumps one day, one of our field training officers, he'd worked a long time in gang enforcement, but he says, Sheriff, I'll never forget something you told me when I first started, and I tell my trainees about what your expectations are of us. And I said, what's that? And he told me of a call when he was young. We were working out of the Selma substation. I was a sergeant, and he said, I got a call of cattle in the roadway. And he said, I didn't know what to do. He said, I took you to another channel, and I told you what I had. He said, all you told me was round them up. And he said, I got exactly what you meant when you said that. You expect me to take care of business. I didn't need your permission to do my job. And he took care of the call. And he said that what the sheriff wants, and he tells his trainees, is for you to take care of business. You don't need to call and ask permission. And I thought, wow, you never know, because I didn't remember that conversation. I didn't remember it at all. But the lesson is you never know the words you say to people and what they mean and how they remember it. And so words are important, whether they be hurtful, encouraging, or inspirational. Your words matter, what you say to people. And I'm reminded of things that I've said to people that I have no idea. I cannot remember the conversations, but it's a lesson for me that I learned that. I will finish up and then make sure there's plenty of time for questions with what I said at the board the other day, because I took a long time to think about what I was going to say. And you all know I've talked before this group about the literacy program, when I found out that 60% of the people in our state our national prisons nationwide are illiterate. And I called our juvenile hall years ago talked to Linda Penner, who was our chief at the time, and I said, Linda, this is disturbing to me that people in prisons are illiterate. And I said, what about in juvenile hall, where are we? And she says, they're reading, all the kids are reading 4 to 5 grade levels below where they should be. And I thought, holy cow, and I'm a reader, I love to read. And being the school librarian, I love children's books. But it stood to reason to me, if we can improve literacy, can't we reduce crime? And so I did. So I started the Sheriff's Reading Posse, where we give out brand new children's books when we have the opportunity in the jail, in our lobby, in our patrol cars, our CSOs, just to encourage kids to read it. And it delivers 2 messages. First of all, not only is it delivering the message that reading is important, but the positive relationship and connection that it gives to law enforcement with the kids in our community. I think that's important. I had a correctional officer come to me one time, and he had given a book to some kids in the lobby of our jail. He says, I'll never forget the look on that child's face when I handed him a book and told him he could keep it. He didn't have to return it. He could keep it, take it home. But inside every book, there is crime prevention information, as well as an application for a library card, a Fresno County library card. It's a kind of initiative that I can never measure to see how successful it is, but I feel in my heart that it's going to make a difference, because I know that there are families that may not have books in their homes. They're just trying to make ends meet, and to have this in the book in the home. The other issue with the Reading Posse is we let the kids choose the book, because it might be embarrassing for a 5th grader for somebody to hand them a 5th grade book, right? They may be reading at a 3rd grade level. So they get to choose the book out of a selection. So that's been very important to me, but I kind of coordinated my comments for Tuesday around literacy. And one of the things also I began with was, wouldn't it be easier in law enforcement if people would remember the lessons they should have learned when they were children? They learned and remembered to say please and thank you. Keep your hands off other people's stuff. Keep your hands off each other. And learn the lessons from those children's stories we read and learned, like Little Red Riding Hood, don't talk to strangers. The 3 Little Pigs, brains can overcome brawn. The Secret Garden, never let anyone impose limitations on your abilities. The Phantom Toll Booth, appreciate every single moment you've been given. And from Charlotte's Web, friendship is the best gift. Most of all, the Bible. When we start feeling a little too all-important and full of ourselves, remember God's grace. I've worked through tragedy and triumph, praise and scorn. And when I'm asked if I would change anything, I said, I don't know, I don't think so, because if you change one thing, you change everything, even the lessons you learn from the bad times you go through. I recognize the fellow department heads and law enforcement agencies in Fresno County, because we cannot all work alone. Believe me, in the sheriff's office, just like the city police department, you need your public works, you need your child services, you need your DA's office, you need your probation department. We have to work together and cross those boundaries and erase those boundaries when we can. Recognize the men and women of the Fresno County Sheriff's Office. I might get a lot of credit, I might get a lot of accolades, but the credit goes to the men and women that get the job done every single day, working in the jail, working in the field. Our support staff, who is so important to me, because they may not wear a badge, but we couldn't be doing our job in accomplishing our mission without our dispatchers and records clerks, business office, and all of those that provide the support. Going back to children's books, one of my favorite is the Velveteen Rabbit. It was written back in the 30s. And the story is of toys who live in a nursery. And there's a little rabbit named Velveteen, and his heart's desire was to be real. He wanted to be a real rabbit. So he sought counsel of an old skin horse in the nursery. And here's how the skin horse described to the little rabbit what it was to become. The toys are in the nursery, and the skin horse says, being real isn't how you're made, it's a thing that happens to you. Does it hurt, said the rabbit. Sometimes, said the horse. Does it happen all at once, like being wound up, or bit by bit, asked the rabbit. The wise horse replied, it doesn't happen all at once. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby, but these things don't matter. Well, these things don't matter at all, because frankly, my hair is thinning, my joints are getting loose and shabby, but believe me, I've received so much more than what I've been given. What I have given. Finally, I recognize my family. You can only imagine what it's been like for my husband, my children, my grandchildren, and now we have a great-granddaughter. But the most important job I had was raising those two kids to be good, responsible adults, and they are, and they're great parents as well. I'm not going anywhere. I'll still live in this area. We live just west of Kingsburg, and our family are all very close. We all live within like 15 miles of each other, so I get to be a pain in the butt for my family after I retire. And I finished my remarks, and I think the analogy is good where I talk about traveling through the woods of my career, and it's the ending of a poem by Robert Frost. And the last stanza goes, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you have.